Coats, the podcast that undresses scientists. I'm Elodie Chabrol and I can't wait to take you with me to meet the humans behind the research. We will of course talk a little bit about science, but we will mostly talk about them. Hello and welcome to this very first episode of Under the Lab Coat. This podcast is the little English brother of Sous la Blouse, that is in French, and I hope you will enjoy listening to scientists' stories about their life. Now, let's welcome my amazing guest, Celina Ray, a neuroscientist. Hi, Celina.
Hi, Elodie. Thank you for the invitation to join you today.
I'm really happy to have you. And actually, we worked in the same building, and I'm really happy that you're going to tell your stories today at this podcast. And I'm super happy you're starting the podcast. So thank you.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. So we're going to start. This is usually the tradition, is that we're starting with the lab coat on.
Okay.
So we're in your lab and I see you don't wear a lab coat, so it's the virtual lab coat on for you to tell me what your research are about.
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a neuroscientist, which means I'm interested in how the brain works, or in my case, how the brain doesn't work sometimes.
Okay.
So specifically what I've worked on for maybe the past 15 years and what my lab now works on is Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common cause of dementia. And it's a condition that really is a huge health challenge for society, because at the moment, at least in the UK, there are 850,000 people who are living with dementia, but we don't have any disease modifying treatments. So what I mean by that is we have nothing that will either delay the onset or slow down the progression of Alzheimer's disease. So this is a huge challenge for us. It's a disease which is very common. It's a disease which affects not only the person living with the disease, it affects their whole family. And it's a disease that at the moment we can do very little about. And the consequence of that is the individuals who are living with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia quite often need long-term care. It's obviously very hard for their family and their loved ones, and it also has a huge cost to the economy. Yeah. So there's this huge unmet need, and the question therefore is, what can we do about that? So in my lab, we are very much laboratory-based scientists. We're quite far away from the clinic, but we are really interested in trying to understand what are the very first things that go wrong in the brain of somebody with Alzheimer's disease. And our motivation for that is, if we want to treat these diseases effectively, we want to intervene as early as we possibly can. So if we can understand the very first things that are going wrong in neurons, which are the cells of the brain affected in Alzheimer's disease, we can then design new treatments and new drugs to help the cells cope with those things that are going wrong, or to stop them from happening altogether. And what we do to try and do that is we use stem cell models. And so most people have heard of stem cells. The reason that they are so important to us is the human brain is inaccessible to us during life. So we can't just go around taking samples of people's brains as much as I'd like to. People are generally not that keen. And so what we do instead is we use stem cells, which are kind of like a blank slate, and we can turn those stem cells into neurons. And then we can study those neurons in the lab from people with Alzheimer's disease, people without Alzheimer's disease, and look for the differences between the two. And that's where we get the clues into what might be going wrong in the brain of someone with Alzheimer's.
And you also work with organoids, don't you? So it's like mini brains.
Yeah, so we started, I think if I can try and paint a picture for listeners who might not know very much about how we grow cells in the lab, most of our work is done in 2 dimensions. So we grow the cells in plastic petri dishes, and they grow in a single layer stuck down to the plastic. And obviously that's not very representative of what our brain is like. And so we're trying to move towards making more realistic models. And the first step in that process is to have something in 3 dimensions. And so we grow organoids, as you said, we sometimes call them mini brains. And they are 3D balls of cells that are probably about the size of a lentil. And because they are growing in 3D and the cells are attached to each other rather than a plastic, they are a little bit more representative of the environment that our brain has. So yeah, really exciting technology and really cool to be working with it.
Thank you for explaining your research in such easy way to understand and exciting way as well. So now my burning question is, do you wear a lab coat in the lab?
So sadly for me, I don't get a chance to wear a lab coat very much these days. And that is in part a reflection of the fact that my position's changed over kind of the past decade. So when I first started out working in Alzheimer's, I was first a PhD student and then a postdoc, and there probably 80% of my time was in the lab. So I was in a lab coat the whole time, particularly in cell culture. So we have two different lab coats. We have one that we use in what I will call the general lab or the routine lab, where we run assays and kind of regular experiments and downstream analysis of the cells. But when we're working with the cells themselves, we have a different lab coat, and that's because human cells, just like us, are susceptible to infection. So it's really critical that we keep everything sterile. And so we'd have a white lab coat in the lab and a blue lab coat in cell culture that really signifies that, you put your blue lab coat on and it really gets you into the zone of having this step change in behavior of being super clean and super careful. Sadly, now I'm a professor and I have my own group, which is a huge privilege, but sadly it means I don't get to wear a lab coat very often because I spend more time in my office than in the lab these days. But I still, from time to time, I still get to put one on.
Yeah, especially when it's, nice cells to go and check. It's always really good, to see them on the microscope.
Exactly.
Happening.
I think all my group look horrified when I step in and put the lab coat on. It's, oh God, she's here. Everyone hide.
She's in the lab. Everyone just hide from her. Okay, so thank you. Now, the tradition. So people don't know this podcast very well now because that's the first episode. But in French, usually what I do is that we had the lab coat on, at least the virtual one, because, not the real one, to talk about science. And we're going to remove it to talk about you. Are you
Excellent.
ready?
Let's go for it. Let's go for it.
So is research something that you wanted to do from an early age, or is it something you discovered later? What did you want to do when you were a kid?
It's definitely something that I discovered later. So I'm from a town in the north of England called Barnsley, which is, I guess for anyone who doesn't know it, it's quite a underprivileged area. So I didn't grow up in a family where it was a town with a lot of unemployment, not as many opportunities, and definitely I grew up not very exposed to a lot of career options. And so I got into science really because it was one of the subjects at school that I enjoyed and found that I was quite good at. And I think those two things are always linked. You tend to enjoy things that you're quite good at, right? And, at home, I used to watch my dad fixing things around the house. And I think there's a little bit of kind of enjoying how things are put together and seeing how things work, and when things are broken, trying to fix them, which is basically what I'm doing now, right? Just on a very, very complicated scale. And so I think that kind of got me generally interested in science as a whole. But I would say that, at least when I was in junior school and secondary school, like high school, I didn't really know what you could do in terms of a career in science. The only things that I was really aware of were to train in medicine and be a doctor or be a vet, right? They're the kind of two options. And I knew that I wanted to do something that was medically orientated, but I didn't want to be a doctor. I was going to say I don't like interacting with people. That's not true. But I kind of saw myself more as a behind the scenes. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Kind of behind the scenes and contributing to how to drive a field forward, hopefully, rather than in that kind of patient interaction. And I think when things changed for me really was that period between 16 to 18 when we do A levels. And I did chemistry, biology and physics. We had a chemistry teacher who was phenomenal, and she'd actually done a PhD, and we you know, I remember us in class being like, but you're a chemistry teacher, so why are you called doctor?
Yeah.
Right. And then that's where I kind of was first exposed to this idea of doing an extended period of research, what doing a PhD meant, and the fact that doctor didn't just mean medical doctor, right? And together with the physics and biology teachers, they also really made an effort to see that we were exposed to what science was like in real life. And I think this is something I talk to students about a lot when I'm doing teaching, is the fact that learning science is very different to doing science, right? And just because you enjoy one, it doesn't mean you would enjoy the other. And so they took us on lots of kind of trips to see research labs. We took a day trip to go to Sellafield, the nuclear power plant, to see, you know, what physics is in real life. It was the most ridiculous thing because it took 6 hours to get there. We did like a 1 hour to and then 6 hours back. It was like such a ridiculous trip, but amazing that they made the effort to really, you know, they thought, you know, we've got these group of kids who probably have no idea what science in real life looks like. So the fact that they made an effort to see us exposed to that is something I'll really be grateful for. They
are amazing because in Paris, for example, we didn't have that. Science was just where you were taught in school, you know, so you wouldn't meet any scientists. Our teachers, they were not really pushing us to meet scientists. So for us, science was just that, you know, and a career in science wasn't something we knew was there.
Yeah, 100%. And actually quite recently, I've been speaking to one of the local primary schools that's in the vicinity of the lab. And they have an annual day where they go and have a tour of the Crick Institute and stuff. And I think, God, I would have loved that as a kid. But, you know, there aren't any big research institutes in Barnsley, is the matter of the fact. So you need someone who, you know, has the means and the motivation and the capability to kind of arrange for those interactions to happen. And yeah, so at the end of A levels, I was really thinking, well, what am I going to do at university? And I think at the time, a lot of people feel that, you know, that's the last decision you will make, and whatever you do at university, that's the path you're on for life, right? Which is really not the case. But I basically loved biology, loved chemistry, didn't want to drop either of them, and so I went and did biochemistry at university. And it was really there where, you know, again, I sort of thought maybe I'll go into research afterwards, who knows? But it was there where I got the chance to really work in a lab and do independent research projects. And that was, again, another real key moment, because I think coming back to this idea of doing science is very different to learning science. I actually really enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed running experiments. I enjoyed troubleshooting when things went wrong. And I enjoyed having kind of a big question that we were striving towards answering.
But it's a bit like, you know, you were talking about your dad fixing stuff in the house, but I feel like when we're doing experiments, it's a bit that we're doing as well, when we're troubleshooting, you know. So it didn't work. Why? And then you're basically like going through all the reasons it could have gone wrong and trying to fix everything.
Exactly. It's exactly the same. So I think kind of observing that process and watching my dad is almost the first time of developing that skill set and seeing how somebody thinks through a problem and troubleshoots things and, you know, works out what is the logical order that we will try all these different things to do.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's exactly the same really, and it's a skill that, you know, you take out of the lab and you apply to a lot of situations in real life as well. To not be overwhelmed by a problem and to actually think, right, let's break it down and let's think about what we can address and in what order. And so yeah, it's something that's really, really useful. But yeah, so at university, I guess I fell into Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, I was about to ask, because biochemistry, how did you end up doing Alzheimer's? Is it just like by chance, or?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think like a lot of people, I went into university, and when I started thinking about research, though, you know, I'm going to do cancer research. Kind of not really thinking about anything more broad than that.
Yeah.
But then we had a series of lectures around protein misfolding. So again, for anyone listening who's not a scientist, all of our cells are made up of different proteins that are really crucial for how those cells work properly. But what happens sometimes in disease is those proteins take on a different shape, and it stops them.
Yeah, they are 3D shaped.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And so in disease, they'll take on a slightly different shape, and it means that they no longer work. But in the case of Alzheimer's disease and other diseases such as Parkinson's, those proteins then build up in the cell, and they, you know, lead to the damage that eventually results in the diseases. And that concept just fascinated me, that you can change the shape of a protein ever so slightly, and all of a sudden, not only does it no longer work, but the cell has no idea what to do with it.
Yeah, just parks it somewhere.
Exactly. And so I really kind of was excited by the science, which is why I got into this area, not realizing at the time what a huge problem it was for society and what an important area it was. That kind of came a little bit later. But I was lucky enough to find a PhD project in London at King's College London after I finished my undergraduate. Went to kind of work there, and that coincided with when there was a real push for an increase in kind of funding into Alzheimer's, and also an increase in public awareness of what Alzheimer's disease is. So moving away from this misconception that it's just people getting a bit old and forgetful, which is absolutely not true, and trying to really shift people into the thinking that Alzheimer's is a disease that affects the brain, and if it's a disease, we can approach it the same way that we have approached cancer and we've approached other diseases. We understand why the disease happens, and then we develop drugs to stop it. And, you know, it was hard to not get carried along with this like increase in momentum. And also when you meet the people who live with the condition or who have cared for loved ones with the condition, you just think, oh, why is no one doing anything about this? You know, why aren't people shouting about this from the rooftops? So, you know, I really feel that, without wanting to sound too cheesy, I feel like I've grown as a scientist as the field has grown up as well. And so that's been a really nice thing to be a part of.
So you've always been a scientist on Alzheimer's?
Yeah, I have actually. I've never worked on any other diseases. I mean, I guess because we use stem cells, there's maybe a sprinkling of developmental biology in there. And I was really fortunate to spend 2 years working up in Edinburgh at the Centre for Regenerative Medicine there to learn how to work with stem cells. And that's the centre where Sir Ian Wilmot was based, who cloned Dolly the sheep. Ooh. So, you know, actually, you know, being part of that institute was such a great experience as well. But yeah, an Alzheimer's scientist with a little sprinkling of development. So yeah, that was a very long answer, but I guess that's kind of my journey.
This is perfect. This is exactly what we want to know. You know, it's always interesting to see how you decide and what, you know, shift also your research, and why sometimes you're working on one subject and not one other. Another, you know, it's like, oh, really interesting. It's just the folding of the protein that got you into Alzheimer.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's also in a way really lucky that I've had continuous funding to be able to stay in the same disease area, because I think a lot of people sadly will switch fields even if they don't want to, because you have to go where your salary is going to be paid from, right? And so I've been really lucky that I've been able to stay continuously within this field, and we need more people to come and work on Alzheimer's. And we need people from diverse backgrounds, because they will bring, you know, diverse ideas and ways of approaching the problem. And the more people we have working in this field, in my opinion, the quicker we will get to the treatments we need.
And actually, you're very, very active in the network of Alzheimer Research UK, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's, as you can probably tell, I quite like talking. So it's,
this is amazing.
You know, for me, doing things like public engagement is really important. A lot of our funding comes from charity. It comes from Alzheimer's Research UK. And if somebody is putting in hours of training to run a marathon, or you know, they're giving up their day to do a bake sale, or, you know, whatever amazing event that people are doing, I think that they deserve to hear in return what is happening to that money.
yeah, they do that to raise money because not everyone is familiar with that, and that's amazing actually. So yeah, baking stuff, running marathon, you raise money for a charity.
Exactly.
And it's true that it's amazing to hear what scientists are doing with that money.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's really important as well because science is a long process.
Yeah.
So experiments take place over a number of years, and what I would class as a breakthrough in the lab can then take 10 or 20 years to translate into a breakthrough in clinic. And I think it's really important that we take time to explain that so that we keep people on side with our mission as well, because I think it's understandable to ask when will the treatments be ready? Why aren't they coming quicker? And so actually what I found is that if you take the time to explain what the process is like, then, people will have an understanding of that and they'll be on board with it. So yeah, it's really nice. And I've made some really good friends through kind of those networks and those events. So.
And it feels good also when you explain your research, and you feel even more like what you're doing is helpful when you talk about like people that it could benefit to, or even just in general to the public about your research.
Absolutely. And so many people are like, oh, it's neuroscientist, I'm not clever enough, I won't understand it. And then, I always say to them, scientists use a lot of fancy words to describe things that are actually quite simple. Let's just see, and then you explain, and it's a really nice feeling when you see that kind of click.
The sparkle in your eyes.
When somebody's like, oh, I get that, I understand it. So, it's nice. And I think it works in both ways because, as you've already said, sometimes we'll be doing stuff in the lab and you go through periods of time where things aren't working or things are real struggles. But then actually when you take a step back and have that kind of more big picture conversation with someone, it gives you a little bit of motivation to think, okay, it's not, we're one piece of a very much bigger jigsaw, and the stuff that we're doing does really, really matter. So it does give you that kind of motivation to keep ploughing on.
Yeah, I'm a convinced science communication person for sure. But what was the first thing you did in public engagement or science communication?
Oh gosh, we host oh no, actually that's not the first one. So when I was at King's, the then head of department had this crazy but brilliant idea that we were going to have an institute open day. And so we did a Saturday where I think 200 members of the public could sign up.
Okay.
And they split these 200 people into groups of 15. And we had something like 20 different research stations around the building. And each group went around chaperoned and saw 4 research stations in the morning and 4 research stations in the afternoon, sorry. And it was just such a phenomenal undertaking in terms of logistics and organisation that I'm very glad that I wasn't in charge of it. But I did have a research station where we were explaining a particular technique called a Western blot, which is a thing that we use to analyse proteins. Not everyone, I'm guessing you don't love a Western blot, the reaction you just gave
I
me.
love them. It's just, I've been traumatised by them in the lab.
But again, just really in a very simple way, taking people through what that particular technique is, why we use it, and what we get to see out the other side. So that was brilliant. And then since joining UCL, we do a lot of similar things, such as open afternoons where people can come and hear research talks. I've done similar things at Pint of Science, which is an event that everyone can come to.
You should check out. It's a cool event, I've heard.
Yes. And then one of my, not the first, but one of my favourite things we did.
That's the question I was about to ask you.
So
Perfect.
the thing that I absolutely loved was we did a takeover at the Science Museum in London. So they have a monthly event called Science Museum Late, which is between 6 and 9 on the last Wednesday of the month. Every event has a theme, and I was lucky enough to meet the director of the Science Museum at a UCL event, and I said, well, you've never had dementia as a theme. And, we had this conversation where he said, but isn't it going to bring everyone down? It's meant to be a fun evening. And, do you really think it would fit well? And I said, well, let us try and convince you. And we eventually did a takeover. We ran this event that covered all aspects of the brain, how we do testing, how, very uplifting. Because as I said to him, as I would say to anyone, I think through research, the theme is really hope, and these conditions are hard, but research is giving us hope that it will be different in the future. And there was something like 5,000 people came through the doors. Not the typical demographic that people might assume we would have. It was all kind of people in 20s, 30s, an audience who might not think learning about dementia is relevant to them at that time of their life, but actually went away knowing a little bit more, or at least playing some silly games, if nothing else. Nice. So.
Yeah, that's the thing sometimes that's complicated when you talk about disease, is that it feels like people are feeling it's going to be sad.
Yeah.
But you don't have to do sad kind of public engagement. You can, turn it into explaining the science and not necessarily being like, this is awful. Yes, it's a bad disease, but this is hope. This is what we're doing. So, I like the way that you say, it's hope. So it's quite like cheerful way of saying we're doing stuff,
Exactly.
Lots of people are working on it. So it is a pretty cool thing to be doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that is kind of the key message that I'd like to give to anyone through public engagement, is that we do the work that we do so the future might look different.
Yeah.
And for the better.
Love it.
So, yeah, that's a good soundbite, wasn't
it? It was an amazing one. So you do a lot of public engagement. Actually, how long per week do you spend doing public engagement, or roughly? Do you have an idea?
It's a good question, actually. It varies. I think you tend to find that you'll have a kind of series of events clustered together and then nothing for a while. If I was to average it out, I would maybe say 1 to 2 hours per week.
Okay.
It tends to be mostly outside of my core working hours, because a lot of these events are happening in the evening or at the weekends, which is nice. It's nice to kind of use a different bit of your brain, I think, to go to these. But yeah, probably a couple of hours a week. So it's not an insignificant part of my role.
It is.
So.
It is still, but it's also, is it in the missions of scientists? Like, is it something you have to do normally in grants? Like the fundings now, they're asking for that, I think.
More and more, yeah, which I think is a good thing. And again, it comes back to this idea of feeding back to the people who've contributed to fund your research, which I think is critical. Most applications that I would now put in for research funding include a little bit on outreach and dissemination, which is good. No, it's brilliant. I think it's really, really good. And it's recognised in my job description as well. So if I apply for promotion, those activities are kind of recognised and rewarded as well. So.
And you feel like it's making you a better scientist as well?
Absolutely. I think, never underestimate where your next idea is going to come from. And, I always have had amazing questions when I've given talks, and again, I think people often qualify them saying, "Oh, I'm not a scientist," and this might be a stupid question.
No,
they're always the ones that I can't answer, right? That I'm just like, yeah, you've really, if I could answer that question, I'd have a Nobel Prize, really. So I think it's, it's really good to get feedback from as wide a pool of people as possible, and it all shapes the research that we do, and it also shapes how we disseminate that research, because if somebody asks a question and it might highlight that perhaps I've not communicated something as clearly, and I need to think a little bit more about that. So it all helps. All feedback is good.
But you know that this podcast, actually, a part of why it's been created, it's because a lot of time during Pint of Science, I saw lots of people asking questions to scientists about their studies, how did they end up working in that field. A lot over the years. It's been 10 years Pint of Science is there, 10 years I'm doing it, and 10 years I'm hearing those questions. And I'm like, there is something, people want to know about scientists, not just the science, but also what you do. And it's that kind of questions that were always really cool, because it's, it's a good moment you have a scientist in front of you. So why not ask, like, but why Alzheimer? Yeah. Why your PhD? How did you end up doing that? It's always really interesting.
Exactly. And there's such a wide range of reasons why people get into certain disciplines as well. And I think people are always quite surprised when I give my story, because it's not through personal experience.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas obviously from a lot of my colleagues, I'm motivated because they've had somebody in their family, and that's kind of propelled them to kind of work in this area. So yeah, there are a lot of reasons why people take specific paths and a lot of different paths by which people end up in these roles as well. So it's good. And I think, it was a point I mentioned like 10 minutes ago, saying when I chose my university course, I felt like this is it, I won't do anything different. And it's just not the case at all, right? There are people, my colleagues, who have been and worked in health policy or in industry settings, or even as things like accountants, and then retrained. I think there are so many ways that people find their way into and out of science.
But that's the thing you don't know when you're in high school. You feel like the decision you're taking is the final decision, but actually no.
Exactly.
It shapes, your career is shaping itself throughout the years. Thank you for sharing all those stories. I'm going towards something even more personal.
Okay.
What do you do outside of the lab and the public engagement?
Yeah, so I think
hobbies and stuff.
Yeah, I guess the main thing at the minute is running. It's it's good for. I'm not a fast runner, but I do enjoy it, and I particularly have enjoyed getting into longer distance running because I think I'm quite slow, but I'm very stubborn. So if I set out on a distance, I'm going to finish it no matter how long it takes me. And I think, it's obviously got great physical benefits, but for mental, I always call it, there's a phrase about like moving meditation, which I quite like, that it's really good for headspace and clarity. And so, we do a few run a few times a week. There's a initiative called Park Run, which I'm a bit obsessed with.
So what is it about?
So it's a free 5k run that happens on Saturday mornings at 9 a.m, which is the bit that puts a lot of people off. But they happen all around the UK. There are hundreds in the UK, and it's such a inclusive event that I really like. There are the people there who come out and smash a 5k out in 14 minutes or something. I'm definitely not one of those. And there are people who will walk the whole thing, and that is fine, and anywhere in between is fine. And it's all about just getting out and being active and having something that's not intimidating and anyone can turn up to. So I do those most Saturdays, actually. And then at the minute we're training together with a colleague and a friend of mine. We're in marathon training.
With Helen, right?
With Helen.
So
Helen,
she did the Sous la Blouse.
Yes.
In French.
Yes.
So if you speak French, you can listen to Helen.
Yeah. So she and I were planning to run a marathon together, but the dates didn't work out with some work travel.
Yes.
So she is running the London Marathon on October the 2nd, and I'm running the Chicago Marathon on October the 9th, because I have to go out there for work anyway. So that's really exciting, and that will be basically taking up my whole summer.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than running,
But for the run, is it your first marathon?
It's my 5th marathon.
Ooh, so you know how to train and everything.
Yeah, I would not say I've always been as diligent with the training as I should have been. But I feel this year, I was 40 this year, and I think it kind of feels like a milestone year of like, let's do something big and let's do it properly as well. So at the minute, I feel really motivated to train really in a very disciplined way, but that's also because it's very early on in the training plan and all of the runs are in single figures, right? Once you get 10 miles and above, that motivation might wane a little bit, but we'll see what happens. But it's nice running around London through the summer. It's quite nice,
especially if you have a friend to train with. It's quite cool.
Exactly.
It's a nice target you have together.
Exactly. It makes it more fun, but it also means we can hold each other accountable, which I think helps a lot. And yeah, I guess apart from running, it's there's so much stuff going on in London, you can never get bored. My particular favourite thing to do here is I really like going to live music and gigs. gigs, and I'm so happy that those have restarted again post-pandemic. So we were at a music festival a couple of weeks ago.
In Barcelona, right?
In Barcelona, yeah. We went to Primavera Sound, which was lovely, and guaranteed weather, which you don't get at UK festivals. But there's another one coming up in London at the end of August called All Points East, which I'm quite excited about. And yeah, it's kind of nice. I think it's, we're very fortunate when you're in a big city that when bands tour, they nearly always pass through. So that's probably my other favourite thing to do.
What's your favourite kind of music?
So I like sort of indie guitar-y music and a little bit of dance as well. So I'm going to see LCD Sound System at the weekend, which will be very fun. But actually quite open-minded. I also quite like when friends say, let's go and see this show. And, and it's something that I maybe wouldn't have discovered myself, but then you get to find out something new. So I'd say, even though I've got my favourites, I'm open-minded to most things. So
nice. Okay, so good gigs planned.
Yeah, and then other than that, just chilling with the cat.
Exactly. Thank you.
I know you've been desperate to get to the cat conversation, so...
So let's talk about the cat.
Billy, my cat. He's an absolute angel. He's the best cat ever. No, he was a lockdown baby. I'm afraid I fell into the cliche of getting a kitten in lockdown. Something that had been on the cards for a while, I would say, but lockdown accelerated it slightly. He's a British short hair, and he is a cinnamon British short hair. So he's all brown, which is quite unusual for a cat, and he looks a bit like a teddy bear to me.
Yeah, it definitely looks like a teddy bear, and he has his own Instagram account.
He does, the Outstanding Bill. You can find him and follow him.
I love that.
I need to monetize that somehow, don't I? I need sponsorship. If anybody's listening and wants to send my cat free stuff, just contact me. But no, he's a lot of fun. He's like the cutest but grumpiest looking cat I've ever seen. And it's, I feel like houses feel empty when they don't have pets in them. So it's nice to have him around.
And you're taking him for walks.
Well,
you managed. That's the thing. I've tried with my cat. It's not happening.
I think you've set me up here to make me sound like a crazy cat woman at the end of the recording. So it's because I live in an apartment block and I don't have direct access into the garden. And British short hairs are meant to be quite happy as indoor cats. It's part of the reason that I selected that breed, because they don't actually mind if they're indoor cats. But I'm a scientist. I wanted him to have an enriched environment. And so I thought, well, how I don't have direct access to the garden, but how can I kind of get him out? And so I got one of these little harnesses that you can put on the cat, and you can't really walk them, they walk you. I sort of just follow them around. But it's nice. He likes, because he's had it since he was a kitten, he's not resistant to it.
That's nice.
And he likes going out and sniffing all the plants, and he's got his little cat friend Alfie who lives a few doors down. So I think he has a happy life.
Yeah, he looks, well, people can check on Instagram. He definitely has a happy life, and he's very, very cute. We're approaching the end of this podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It was amazing. Do you have anything you want to finish this episode with? Any last message or something you haven't said you want to come to say, or something you want to come back to?
Gosh, I always feel the pressure for these bits. I think, I've been asked this in a few interviews and articles now of kind of advice that you would give people. And it's sort of career orientated, but I think is actually quite applicable more broadly to any situation in life. And it's something that I am trying to get better at, because I've never been very good at it, which is enjoying the moment. And I think in a lot of and I know that sounds quite sort of flippant and trivial, but what I mean is in a lot of situations, particularly for me in work, I think you're always looking to the next thing, or you kind of reach a milestone and then all of a sudden it's like, well, what are your next goals? And so I think I'm trying to be less rushing from one step to another, and actually just take time to kind of enjoy an achievement or enjoy where I am right now. And I think you can do both of those things together, but trying to focus a bit more on the enjoyment part rather than what's coming next. Where am I going next? So yeah, I would leave that out there for everyone, perhaps as something that you can do, and just try and take the pressure off yourself a little bit.
I think that's a great advice to end the podcast with. Thank you very much, Selina.
Thank you for having
amazing.
me.
And I will put all the links of the stuff that we talked about in the description, so people can just click and find out about everything we said.
Excellent.
Thank
Good.
you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. That's it for this episode of Under the Lab Coat. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't hesitate to rate the podcast on the platforms, to share it around, and to subscribe. Thank you!